Hey, it's Adam from Mini Battlefield Games. You landed here. This is a video on how to get started airbrushing. Make sure you subscribe, hit that notification button, hit like if you like this video, and without further ado, we're going to get started on how do you get started airbrushing. Hey guys, this is probably the #1 question that I'm asked, whether it's through email or Messenger or social media platforms or in person in general. Usually through the years that I've been commission painting, I get referenced as, well, how do I get started using an airbrush to airbrush my miniatures? So I wanted to address that topic. We're going to do a 4-part series. Today's going to be the overview, then the second one's going to be over airbrushes, the third one will be compressors, and then the fourth video is going to be accessories, how to make your airbrushing easy and safe. So, this is the question. What do I need to get started airbrushing my miniatures? Like I said, this is probably the #1 question I get asked. Airbrushing can seem pretty daunting, seem pretty expensive. It's an investment, not only into your time, but into your money and resources and stuff like that. And it changes the way you hobby, in a large sense. So, the topic isn't really easy to digest, because the airbrushing topic alone, spans across all kinds of different hobbies. The gaming, the tabletop, the, training or modeling, areas, and then all the way to artists, canvas painting, all that kind of stuff. So the topic can be pretty broad. So we're going to focus down on specifically miniatures. So how to airbrush your miniatures. Just a disclaimer: I'm not paid by any company. I'm not paid by any product. These are just my opinions. If you disagree with me, let me know down in the comments. Please do so respectfully. Also, something else to mention: I haven't used every tool out there. So, I've been in the hobby for over 11 years now, but that doesn't mean that I've used every tool. So if you have a tool or some special thing that I don't mention or don't talk about and you think it's important in this video or any of the part of this series, be sure to comment below. You can comment why the video is playing, that way you won't forget it. I definitely want to hear from you, so let me know. Feel free. So with that being said, let's get started on some misconceptions. We can address those. Let me know if you agree. Comment below, and let me know what you think about these misconceptions. And if there's any we'd like to add, let me know. These are some of the ones I just thought of when I was doing my notes for this show. First one is airbrushing looks better. That is definitely a misconception. Airbrushing is a tool. Tools don't create art. People do. This is an opinion alone. Airbrushing looks better. So, for example, we're going to show this knight here. You can tell, this is a knight actually I painted. It was airbrushed. For the most part, obviously not everything is 100% airbrushed. It can be, but you can't do certain things airbrushed, which we can talk about that too. And then the other part. So let me show another knight here. This knight is painted with a classical brush. And as you can tell, there are things you like about one and things you don't like about the other one, and so it really just depends. That conception is an opinion on its own. So the second misconception is airbrushing is faster. This one I'm probably going to get a lot of feedback on. Airbrushing can be faster, and it also can be slower. Just like anything, it depends on your skill set. We have a painter in our studio. His name's Alan, and he can do amazing brush work. Now, if I were to set him down with an airbrush, it would probably take him longer to do airbrush work because he's not as familiar with it. Not only that, but you still have to have the proper techniques for something to be efficient and fast. Same thing with brush work. Same thing with an airbrush. The third one we're going to talk about is airbrushing is expensive. Cha-ching. No, not really. Airbrushing isn't that expensive. There are some really good painters out there that paint with very not cheap knockoff airbrushes. When the airbrush breaks or it gets really dirty and they don't really care about it, they just throw it out, buy another one for cheap. For example, you can buy an airbrush for about $12, from China. It's not super amazing, whatever. It gets the job done. And then a compressor with a trap, regulator, and a tank for about $65. Versus if you're gonna just get brushes, like an army painter brush set's about $60. So it is a little bit more money, but it's an investment. It's worth it. That's what we're going to talk about. So, airbrushing is easier or harder, I hear, either one, than bristle brushes. Again, an airbrush is a tool. So, how good are you with the tool? How well do you use the tool? How often have you used the tool? It's very similar to like teaching a child how to ride a bike. You wouldn't go out and take them and put them on a 18-speed mountain bike and say, "Here you go, ride this 3-year-old." It's a tool. It helps you do the job, but the technique is what makes it great. So something I want to another misconception that's not on my notes that I want to address is you can do everything with an airbrush. You can do a lot of things with an airbrush. There are certain things you can't do with an airbrush. There are certain things that you can do with a classical brush, a bristle brush, that you can't do with an airbrush. So the misconception that you can do everything with an airbrush isn't there. Edge highlighting, there's some other tools, techniques, glazing, stuff like that, that you really can't do with an airbrush. It's another tool to our tool belt that we can do to make miniature gaming and tabletop gaming easier and more enjoyable. So we're going to go into the overview section, and we're going to talk about what is airbrushing. So an airbrush works by propelling or pushing high-pressured air through a tube. And what it does is it creates suction that pulls your media, which in this case is going to be paint, from a reservoir that's at lower atmospheric pressure or at normal atmospheric pressure. So you're creating high pressure, you're pulling something in like our paint. The high velocity of the air atomizes the paint and basically puts it into tiny droplets in the air. And it blows it in very fine detail onto whatever your painting surface is. The paint is obviously carried through the air as it's atomized onto the surface. So that's really like the science, I guess. That's way too sciencey for some people. So we'll move on. So there are three main components that I talk about when airbrushing. That's the airbrush, the compressor, and the the connection or the accessories and stuff like that. So we're going to briefly go over the three things. We'll talk about a little bit about an airbrush. Obviously this is the endpoint we talked about when defining what is airbrushing. This is where paint is atomized and is propelled onto the object that you're trying to paint. Airbrushes are classified by three characteristics. So the first characteristic is the action or the trigger type, the paint feed system, and the mix location, so where the paint actually mix. And we'll go over this more in details in the Getting Started Airbrushing, the airbrush portion. The second main component that you need is the compressor. This is pretty obvious to most people. This is simply where it's simply a device that compresses air and allows and it serves up the air somehow to the airbrush. There are two types. There's a piston and a diaphragm air compressor. A piston can be oiled or oilless. In our case, we want to stick to oilless because you don't want to risk getting any oil into the airbrush. And then there are ways to mitigate the oil. Then there's diaphragm compressors, which are quieter and usually smaller. Then there are tankless or tank compressors, where you can add on a tank to the compressor, which gives you the benefit of the compressor doesn't have to run all the time. It doesn't have to get hot all the time. Basically what happens is if you have a tank on your compressor, it will fill up the tank, and then it'll turn off. And then when the pressure in the tank gets at a certain pressure level, the compressor will turn back on. If you don't have that tank, your hose is essentially your tank. So the compressor will pressurize your hose all the way to the airbrush. And when the pressure runs out, which the hose only holds a small amount of air, and so when the air runs out of the hose, it has to run. So your compressor's running more often. Heating up can cause it to burn out easier, or also turn off, overheat, that kind of stuff. Also, a hot air compressor introduces more moisture. So that's one of the negative things about it. I always recommend getting a compressor with a tank, or adding on a tank somehow. But we'll go over compressors in more detail on the third video. It's the Getting Started Airbrushing Compressor. And then the last part is your air supply and moisture trap. Basically what this is your regulator, which regulates how much pressure gets allowed through your compressor into your hose to your airbrush. Typically, when we're talking about miniature airbrushes, we're talking about around 20 psi. There's some applications where you could go all the way up to 30. There's some applications where you can paint down as low as 12 psi, even lower 8 psi. And it also depends on the brush, what kind of brush you have, the type of brush, that kind of stuff. But the regulator allows you to have the flexibility of operating your airbrush at different psi, or pounds per square inch. So you have your hose, like for example, I have a quick release, so I can change out my airbrushes really quickly. The length of your hose could differ. The type of hose it is, whether it's braided or rubber, those type of things, they don't matter too much. I use a braided hose just because it's a little bit more durable. And then something to keep in mind there with our air supply when we talk about it is like thread sizes. Make sure your thread size of your hose matches your airbrush. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about in air supply and moisture traps is obviously the moisture trap. What does it do? So the moisture trap just removes water or moisture from the compressed air as it's flowing to your airbrush. And there are many different types, and we'll talk about those in the final video when we talk about different accessories and stuff like that. And we'll also talk about it too in the compressor video, because a lot of compressors will come with some of these components. They'll come with a regulator, a gauge, and maybe a moisture track. Actually, the compressor that I recommend comes with a tank, a hose, a moisture track, regulator, and a pressure gauge. So it comes with everything that you need. So that's all included in that. And it's one that I use, and it doesn't break the bank for sure. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. This video, I want to keep it short. So the components that you need are an airbrush, obviously, a compressor with a tank, and then a hose to connect that matches your airbrush, a regulator, and then a moisture trap. So 5 things that you need. Those are the essential things that you need. Now I hear you screaming at me, YouTubers, that hey, there's other things that you need. That is true. There are cleaning supplies, stuff like that, maybe brushes and stuff like that to clean, thinners. We'll talk about that in the 4th video. Some other recommended accessories to make your life easier and safer. So masks, you want to have a ventilated area, maybe even a spray station, stuff like that. We'll talk about that in the 4th video. They aren't 100% necessary, but they will make your life easier, and they will keep you safe. So we'll go over these in the Getting Started Airbrushes accessories. Make airbrushing easy and safe. Congratulations. I'm proud of you. You made it this far. Be sure to subscribe. Hit that like button if you like it. Leave your comments below and let us know if there's anything that you want us to specifically cover, or maybe we got something wrong. Let us know, and we'll try to get that corrected and get back to you. Also, when you subscribe, be sure to check that notification button. Check us out on Facebook /Mini Battlefield Games, on Twitter @Mini Battlefield, and then on Instagram @Mini Battlefield Games. I wish you the best, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.